Hello friends, welcome back. My name is Lana. Thank you for returning to my videos, or if it's your first time here, thank you for coming. I love you already. Thank you for supporting me. You know, when I prepare for making these videos, I never actually think about the intro or the outro. I just kind of think about the guts of it. So that's all I'm prepared for. So let's get into it. So in June of 1947, which was just a few weeks before the infamous Roswell incident, a top secret document was formed. And not just by some two random government officials, no ma'am. This was written by Albert Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer, aka the father of the atomic bomb. So two top-tier scientists collaborating on a memo in the 1940s. That's kind of no biggie, right? Especially when these are two guys who are used to big ideas, you know? But what's so interesting is what they wrote about. The memo is titled Relationships with Inhabitants of Celestial Bodies, which sounds fancy, but all it means is how should us humans deal with aliens should the time come? They're saying that contact with extraterrestrial beings is not only possible, it's inevitable, and they're telling the US government that it could either be peaceful or hostile, and that the world needs to be ready for whichever outcome. So it poses actual scenarios on how to respond based on their temperament. So if they're peaceful, then we can respond peacefully, and if they're not peaceful, well then we will have every right to defend ourselves. I know it all sounds science fiction-y, I get it, but when you read the memo, it feels kind of legit, and I think that that's why people are still talking about it around 80 years later. So today we're going to unpack the story of the Einstein-Oppenheimer memo, where it came from, what it actually says, why some people think it's real, and why a lot of historians think that it's fake news. But before getting into the contents of the memo, I think it's really important that we remember who Einstein and Oppenheimer were in 1947, beginning with Albert Einstein. By the mid-1940s, he was more than just a brilliant physicist, he was a global icon. And his name was, and still kind of is, used synonymously with intelligence. Like, if you're trying to be a douche, you're going to be like, okay, Einstein. And decades earlier, his theory of relativity had radically transformed the way we understand time, space, and gravity. Maybe not for you, certainly not for me, because I'm not really that smart, but there is people out there whose life he made easier. And by the time of this memo, he was no longer just a man of theories and equations. He had evolved into a vocal public intellectual, and he was deeply involved in the moral and political issues of his time, including war and fascism. And then we come to J. Robert Oppenheimer. In 1947, he was still at the height of his influence. Just a few years earlier, he had been the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, which was a top secret government program in World War II to create the world's first nuclear weapons. And that was no small achievement, because under his leadership, some of the greatest scientific minds gathered in the New Mexico desert to unlock the power of the atom. So before the war, Oppenheimer was already a really respected theoretical physicist, but the Manhattan Project had really catapulted him into a new level of fame. And by 1947, he had become a key advisor to the US government on matters of science, military technology, and national security. And what makes the 1940s such a fascinating and important time for a document like this? Well, the Second World War had just ended, but the Cold War had just begun. The atomic age had arrived, bringing with it not only power, but also fear. And in this environment, people like Einstein and Oppenheimer were trying to navigate a new world order. They were grappling with ethical complications of scientific discoveries, questioning the boundaries of government secrecy, and thinking deeply about the survival of civilization itself. Now, let's get into this bad boy, and I've got my notes. I got a new phone, by the way, but I couldn't use it on here because my stupid plug this has a different connection now. Bloody Apple. Get your shit together, Apple. The memo starts off saying, relationships with extraterrestrial men presents basically no new problem from the standpoint of international law. But the possibility of confronting intelligent beings that do not belong to the human race would bring up problems whose solution it is difficult to conceive. There is no difficulty in accepting the possibility of coming to an understanding with them and of establishing all kinds of relationships. The difficulty lies in trying to establish the principles on which these relationships should be based. It would be necessary to establish communication with them through some language, and afterwards, as a first condition for all intelligence, that they have a psychology similar to that of men. So basically that's saying that if we ever did establish communication with intelligent aliens, the legal stuff like how we would communicate with each other wouldn't really be that different with how countries communicate with each other. So this part wouldn't be a big problem. But if these beings aren't like humans, how can we relate to them? It's one thing to start talking through language, but if they don't think the way that we do, how can we relate? So in other words, communication is our only real step forward, because if their mind works different to ours, it'll be almost impossible to truly connect with them, cooperate, or agree on anything meaningful. So just a quick pause here to say, if you are enjoying this, please like, comment, or subscribe. I'm a really new channel here, so if the people who aren't already watching my videos don't show that you're enjoying it, then basically YouTube won't help me get more views. So it would really help me, genuinely would help me. So let's move on to the next part. At any rate, international law should make place for a new law on a different basis called Law Among Planetary Peoples, following the guidelines found in the Pentateuch. I'm pretty sure I'm butchering that, but the Pentateuch that refers to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They include things like religious laws, moral structures, and other things, including the 10 Commandments, laws on justice, purity, and community life, and guidelines for governance, property, and conflict resolution. If these intelligent beings were in possession of a more or less culture and perfect political organization, they would have an absolute right to be recognized as independent and sovereign peoples. We would have to come to an agreement with them to establish the legal regulations upon which future relationships should be based, and it would be necessary to accept many of their principles. Finally, if they should reject all peaceful cooperation and become an imminent threat to Earth, we would have the right to legitimate defense, but only insofar as would be necessary to annul this danger. Alright, so this part is saying that if aliens did show up and they had their own social and political system, like real organization and culture, then we'd basically have to recognize them as their own independent people. We'd have to treat them just like a different country. And we couldn't just boss them around and act like we're in charge. We'd have to come to some sort of an agreement with them. We'd have to figure out the rules, how we're going to interact with them. We'd have to accept some of their values as well, because we can't just force all of our human values onto them. But if they turned out to be hostile, then yeah, obviously we'd be able to defend ourselves, but only as much as we absolutely need to. You know, we can't just go on starting a full-on war. We can only defend ourselves as much as we absolutely need to stop the threat that they pose to us. Anyhow, so now we get to the part where they consider humans that have already established life on another planet. It reads, living conditions on these bodies, let's say the moon or the planet Mars, would have to be such as to permit a stable, independent life from an economic standpoint. Much has been speculated about the possibilities for life existing outside of our atmosphere and beyond, always hypothetically, and there are those who go so far as to give formulas for the creation of an artificial atmosphere on the moon, which undoubtedly have a certain scientific foundation and which may one day come to light. So this next part is really sciencey, but also really interesting at the same time. Let's assume that magnesium silicates on the moon may exist and contain up to 13% water. Using energy and machines brought to the moon, perhaps from a space station, the rooks could be broken up, pulverized, and then baked to drive off the water of crystallization. This could be collected and then decomposed into hydrogen and oxygen using an electric current or the shortwave radiation from the sun. The oxygen could be used for breathing purposes. The hydrogen might be used as fuel. So this next part talks about occupation, and if you're a silly goose like me, then you might think that, how are we going to give jobs to aliens? But no, they actually mean occupying up space, like taking up space or land on Earth. And this part was really hard for me to understand. Like, when you read a book or you read something and you read the same line over and over and over again, that was me here. So I've used AI to try and help simplify it for other people who are like me. So I'm going to read that version, but I just want you to know that what I'm about to say next is not exactly what's written in the memo, but I do recommend looking up the PDF of this memo, downloading it, and reading it for yourself. So here, Einstein and Oppenheimer are imagining what might happen if a really advanced alien civilization decided to settle or take over another planet or the moon. Who would get control of that place, and how would that work without causing conflict? They say that there are 4 possible ways that this occupation might happen. So the first one is that one group rules everything. This would mean that one alien civilization just takes over the whole place, but that's considered unfair because other advanced civilizations might want a chance too. So this idea gets rejected because it just gives too much power to one group. The second possibility is to divide the planet into parts, kind of like carving up the planet into zones or territories and giving each alien civilization its own slice. But this will be complicated because deciding on who gets what would be tricky, and some groups might get left out or stuck with areas that are hard to use. Kind of like when you and a group of friends hire out a hotel and everyone wants, the best view or the best bed, well, someone's got to be stuck with that crappy roll-out trundle, and you don't want to be stuck with an angry alien group. And the third possibility is that everyone shares control equally. So all civilizations have joint control and can use the planet however they want without checking with others. Sounds fair on paper, but in reality, it would probably cause chaos. The strongest group would likely push everyone else aside and take over, leading to conflict and instability. And lastly, a moral and peaceful agreement. Instead of fighting over territory, all groups would agree to peacefully share the place. The idea is to respect each other's cultures and rights, and maybe even keep their presence hidden to avoid panic or conflict. This would mean international cooperation, like how countries on Earth come together to manage shared resources or territories. And it finishes by saying that instead of trying to control or dominate, it would be better to internationalize these alien civilizations, meaning treat them as part of a global community working together through agreements and respect. Basically, it's about finding ways to avoid war and chaos if advanced aliens start spreading out into space, focusing on fairness, cooperation, and respect for different cultures. So then they talk a little bit about how until last century, which is really now 2 centuries ago, taking over land was the normal way that countries would take ownership of territories. You'd just go there, you'd plant your flag in the ground, and that's it, that space is yours. But the next part shifts from Earth to space law. It brings up a part from international space law called res nullius, which basically means a thing that belongs to no one. It says, res nullius is something that belongs to nobody, such as the moon. In international law, a celestial body is not subject to the sovereignty of any state that is considered res nullius. If it could be established that a celestial body within our solar system, such as our moon, was or is occupied by another celestial race, there could be no claim of res nullius by any state on Earth. It would exist as res communis, that is, that all celestial states have the same rights over it. So up until this point, the focus has been on legal ideas like who gets to take up what parts of space and how we deal with intelligent life should we ever encounter it. But Einstein and Oppenheimer now pose the question, well, what if they're already watching us? What if our own actions like nuclear testing and whatnot has drawn their attention? Then what? They say, lastly, we should consider the possibility that our atmospheric tests of late could have influenced the arrival of celestial scrutiny. They could have been curious or even alarmed by such activity, and rightly so, for the Russians would make every effort to observe and record such tests. And the memo finishes off by saying, in conclusion, it is our professional opinion based on submitted data that this situation is extremely perilous and measures must be taken to rectify a very serious problem, are very apparent. I personally don't think that I would be afraid if I ever saw a UFO, and I've got a pretty solid reason for this because one day when my husband and I were driving back from a friend's house, he's asleep in the passenger seat and I'm driving and I see like these huge lights moving around in the sky, and I wasn't scared. I was like, oh my God, this is it, it's happening. And then, so like, I'm so thrilled, I'm so happy. And then I think the next day, someone had posted something on a local Facebook page and they said that it was just spotlights from a festival that was going on. But the fact that I was so excited, that's what makes me think that I would be somewhat okay. But that doesn't mean that like, if I was just chilling and a grey, like a friggin' grey was standing in front of me, I would soil myself because that's so unknown. You don't normally see a grey alien standing in front of you. That would make me shit myself. And also, I don't think that they want to hurt us. I really don't, because I feel like if they wanted to do that, they would have done that already. Anyway, so now we have to know, is the memo real? Did Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer really sit down in 1947 and draft this top secret document? On one side, we've got the believers. These are people who think that the memo is exactly what it claims to be, which is a classified government document created in 1947 to help the US prepare people for contact with extraterrestrial life. And why do they think it's real? Well, the 1940s was a wild time. World War II had just ended. Atomic bombs had been dropped. Roswell happened. The Cold War was happening. So if there were any reason to think that we might not be alone in the universe, well, this was a pretty good time. And the memo is written in such a way that you would think a government document would be written. It doesn't seem sensationalized or anything of the sort. It just talks legal framework and moral responsibility. And for a lot of people, that gives it credibility because it reads exactly like a policy would. Plus, the content kind of fits Einstein. It has his ethical focus, his dislike for exploitation, his trust in science, and then you've got Oppenheimer with the atomic bomb weighing on his head. People say that that would be them. Some researchers connect this memo to the infamous Majestic 12 documents, and they were a suggested trove of secret government files that were leaked decades ago, and they detailed a covert group managing extraterrestrial affairs. And while heaps of people think that Majestic 12 was just a huge hoax, others argue that this Einstein-Oppenheimer memo is actually one of the earliest pieces of the puzzle. But on the flip side, you have the skeptics, and they've got some really solid arguments too. They think that the origin of the memo is a little bit sketchy because there's no actual records of it in the government archive. There's no record of it in Einstein or Oppenheimer's published papers, and there's no records of it in any biographies written by credible historians. It just randomly showed up in the middle of the 1990s, which was about 40 years after it had been written. And then we have the issues of the signatures. Some people have compared the memo signatures to that of real authenticated signatures by Einstein and Oppenheimer, and they say that the handwriting doesn't match. They argue that the signatures might have been traced or forged, and that the signature styles are inconsistent to that of Einstein and Oppenheimer's in the 1940s. Another major point is that Einstein's relationship with the US government in 1947 wasn't the best. By that point, he'd become a vocal critic of nuclear weapons, and he was widely considered as politically unreliable. He was blacklisted from many sensitive government projects because of his views, and because of this, historians question whether or not he would have been invited to contribute to a top secret extraterrestrial policy document like this, especially when he was already being kept at arm's length. And during the late 20th century, especially after movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T., there was a huge surge in UFO interest. And alongside that came a flood of forged documents that used people's names like President Truman, Eisenhower, and even Einstein. And by using those people's names, it would give credibility to those documents. So what do you think? Do you think that it's real? Do you think that it's fake? Because there's no real proof either way. There's just a whole lot of circumstantial evidence. But even if it is real or fake, I bet that you didn't think about a lot of the things that we spoke about. Like, what would we do if they came to Earth? How would we try and occupy space with them? This document really forces us to think, what would we do if aliens came to Earth? Would we try and fight them? Would we try and hide? Would we try to control the situation? Or would we try and live peacefully with them just like Einstein and Oppenheimer hoped that we would? So even if it does turn out to be fiction, the ideas inside of it are really powerful. They push us to think not just about aliens, but also ourselves. Who are we? How do we treat others? And how do we act if the universe suddenly got a whole lot bigger? So that's today's video. Let me know what you think. Do you think it's real? Do you think it's fake? Why? Do you think maybe the skeptics are sent to us by the government to turn us into non-believers because they don't want the truth getting out there? Maybe. I think that that's possible. So tell me what you think. I'm really small. I've got like 33 subscribers, so I'll get to respond to every single one of you guys in the comments. So again, like I said before, I never really think about the intro or outro. I just kind of let that be awkward because that's what I am. That's what I do. If you have any other ideas on what you'd like to watch, please let me know. I'm really open to ideas. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you want more alien stuff? Do you want more conspiracies? I was thinking about doing the Port Arthur Martin Bryant, the mass murderer in Australia. I really want to do that, but that is a lot of negative stuff to take in, and that kind of affects my mental health. So I'll do that, but I'd like to learn about that in between other videos. So that's something that I really want to do as well, because like Erin Patterson, I can't see a lot of stuff about that online. So yeah, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. My next goal is 50 subscribers. So if you know anyone that might like this stuff, please share it to them. Let's get to 50. Thank you for watching. Bye guys.